Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wildcard Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our topic for today's webinar is the new driver safety scorecard. So this is a custom report that was built by one of our very own solutions engineers that is available for free in the Geotab Marketplace. And it's a way to help monitor the safety of your fleet and help complement any existing safety policies that you currently have in place. So I'm joined today by one of our account managers, David Fuchs, who will be answering questions. So if you have any questions about the safety scorecard or anything that we're talking about during the webinar, you are very much encouraged to type those into the questions box at any point. And then we'll also have some time for questions at the end of the webinar today. Let's go ahead and jump in here and talk a little bit about the driver safety scorecard. You can see here's our agenda for today's webinar, starting by looking a little bit at the importance of driver safety, the focus of the driver safety scorecard and the purpose, how we calculate the scores that we do, some additional report features, and then finally some logistics, where you can find the report and how you can set it up. Everything that I am going through today is based off of the white paper, which is available for this report in the Geotab Marketplace. So at the end of the webinar, you will receive a copy of this presentation. There are links in this presentation to the Marketplace, to the white paper, so you'll have access to everything that you need to use this tool before we wrap up here today. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of driver safety. We have a quote here from OSHA. Motor vehicle crashes are the leading cause of death and injury for all ages. Accidents that happen on and off the job have far-reaching financial and psychological effects on employees, their coworkers, family, and employers. So right away, we're just talking about why is driver safety so important, and there are a few reasons why it is. Number one, there is a financial aspect to it, which we will talk about a little bit, but number two, there's more of that human element aspect to it. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, 94% of accidents are a result of what the driver did or failed to do. We think of oftentimes accidents as being unavoidable, which sometimes they are, but maybe not as often as we might think. The Network of Employers for Traffic Safety says investing in road safety can reduce a fleet's crash rate by 50%, and it allows you to hang on to that human capital that you've invested in. So talking a little bit about driver safety programs, they're strongly recommended by a few different professional groups. The purpose of a driver safety program, number one, first and foremost, is to save lives and reduce the risk of life-altering injuries. Number two, protects your organization's human and financial resources. And number three, guard against potential company and personal liabilities. And the driver safety scorecard that we're looking at today is designed to complement whatever driver safety programs that you have in place. Now, a driver safety program could be really any number of things. It could be you have weekly or monthly driver safety topics. You have different items that you're focusing on, or you have discussions with drivers. It could be just normal checks and balances, or it could be built into your policy, but it comes down to you're making some effort to address driver safety, whether that's formal or informal. So looking a little bit at the financial impact that accidents can have. Employers collectively pay $60 billion annually for motor vehicle crashes involving their employees. When a company vehicle gets into an accident, these are the direct costs, according to OSHA. The average cost of a vehicle in an accident with property damage is $16,500. The average cost of a car accident that has a non-fatal injury is $74,000, and if there is a fatality, average cost is $500,000. Now, those are the direct costs. Those are the bills that you pay, and those are a little bit easier to quantify. But we have many indirect costs to consider as well. And those of you who might be regular attendees of Wildcard Wednesday over the past few years have heard me talk about indirect costs many times. I'll often use the example of you have a vehicle on the side of the road because the battery died. And in those instances, yeah, there's direct repairs, but at the same time, you're still paying the driver, you're losing productivity. There's other things to consider that are harder to recognize. In instances like this, where you have an accident, some indirect costs include supervisor and fleet manager time, vehicle repair downtime, reassignment of personnel to cover for missing employees, overtime pay to cover work of missing employees, re-entry and retraining of injured employees, administration cost, and accident investigation cost. And these can quickly add up when employees are unable to work. So in our driver safety scorecard, the things that we're focusing on can more or less be boiled down into three categories. Those would be aggressive driving, seatbelt usage, and speeding. So within aggressive driving, we're looking at our ABCs, hard acceleration, braking, and quartering. We're looking at the seatbelt. And then for speeding, we're looking at whatever your regular speeding rule is in your fleet, and also an excessive speeding rule, which is speeds above 85 miles per hour. As far as aggressive driving goes, a sizable portion of the 6.8 million car accidents that occur each year are suspected to be caused by forms of aggressive driving. This can be reduced through use of telematics. Of course, those of you who have been using Geotab for a while are probably familiar with this, but you have an accelerometer that's built into the Go device, and we are measuring force on three different planes. We're looking at side to side, we're looking at up and down, and we're looking at forward and back. In these instances, so for harsh acceleration, we're looking at backward g-force, harsh braking is forward g-force, and harsh cornering is side-to-side g-force. Now, something to keep in mind here is that if you have different classes of vehicles in your fleet, if you have a mix of light duty and medium duty, or medium duty and heavy duty, you need to make sure that all of your rules are set up correctly. So vehicle class must always be considered. Down at the bottom, we have our screen cap showing the harsh braking rule, and you have those three categories. You have passenger car, truck cube van, and heavy duty. And you have this little slider here that you can take and you can drag it depending on the size of the vehicle. And when you drag it, this g-force over here on the right is going to change. What's going to happen is that if you have a mixed fleet, but you just have this rule set to really anything, you're going to get data that's inaccurate. In that case, that requires you to create groups and assign the different classes of vehicles to their own respective groups, and then you have custom rules for each group. This is not something that we're going to be getting into today, but I will tell you that if you're not sure on how to do this, don't be shy. So you need to make sure that this is set up correctly, so you can reach out to whoever you contact for support, or your sales manager, or whoever it is that you deal with. But it's better to ask for help and make sure that it's set up correctly than it is to base your fleet safety on inaccurate data. And I just can't stress that enough. Our next category after aggressive driving is seatbelt usage. U.S. employers spend an extra $5 billion annually on traffic collisions involving employees who did not wear their seatbelt while driving or riding as a passenger. The seatbelt is the #1 safety tool available to all drivers. To put it bluntly, buckle up. If you remember back to taking driver's ed in high school, before you start the ignition, before you turn on the radio, before you do anything else, you put on your seatbelt. OSHA says seatbelt use can be credited with saving approximately 12,000 lives and preventing around 325,000 serious injuries annually in the US. Buckling up reduces the risk of death or serious injury for front seat occupants by 50%. That is a huge number. For truck drivers, that risk is reduced by 60%. So it's the easiest thing there is to do. It's the #1 safety tool drivers have available to them, and it has an enormous impact. Speeding. The NHTSA estimates the annual economic costs of speeding-related crashes to be $40.8 billion. Employers pick up about 20% of that total at $8.4 billion. Speeding has been a factor in over 30% of U.S. crash deaths since 2005. So speeding is the most costly activity that the drivers can engage in, but it's also one of the activities that they have the most control over. They have the most control over the speed that they're going, and it is the most avoidable. So looking at our driver safety scorecard, and now we have our first look at the report here. These are the purposes of the driver safety scorecard. #1, increase driver safety, identify risky drivers, recognize safer drivers. So it's not just a stick, sometimes it's a carrot, and you can use it as a positive reinforcement tool if you like. Reduce possible accidents, enhance whatever internal safety policy you have in place already, improve insurance rates. So it is possible to see up to a 25% reduction in insurance rates through the use of telematics. And in addition to that, you can see up to a 40% drop in accidents through the use of telematics. Mitigate potential for traffic violations, lower vehicle maintenance costs, which is one that people don't often think about, and not directly related to safety, but at the same time, if you have a lead foot, if you're stomping on the gas and slamming on the brakes, and if you're speeding a lot, you're going to wear down your vehicle sooner. It's going to wear down the tires sooner. You're going to wear down the brakes. It's going to have to go in for maintenance more often, and those costs add up. Curb employee benefits costs and minimize vehicle downtime. And you can see down at the bottom there, just a small screenshot of the report, and we'll get a little bit more into that. So we're going to get into our scoring calculations a little bit here. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. I will tell you that for those of you who are extremely interested in how we calculate the scores that we calculate, I cannot recommend strongly enough that you read the white paper, and everything that you need will be available in there for you. But when we are calculating the scores, there are basically 3 different methods that we are using. So #1, we're looking at the event count. So we're looking at how many times they broke a rule. We're looking at the violation percentage, and there's also a hybrid where we're combining both of those together. These are the terms that we're using when we make our calculations. The first one is total driving distance, pretty much self-explanatory. The second one is the exception rule event count, which is the number of times that a rule was broken. Exception rule event distance, which is the distance traveled while breaking an exception rule. We have an exception rule event percentage, which is the distance divided by the total distance. So to give you an example for that, my total driving distance is 10 miles. Of those 10 miles, I was speeding for 1 mile. In that instance, my exception rule event percentage would be 10%. Finally, we have a multiplier, which is a multiplication factor used to normalize, calibrate, and score exception rule data out of 100. So basically what we want to do is we want to make sure that everyone is on the same scale. Whether for the date range that we're looking at, you drove 500 miles or you drove 3,000 miles, you're being judged on the same scale, and you're not at an advantage or disadvantage based on different factors. So looking at the event count, the way that we score that, so again, we're just looking at the number of times a vehicle broke a rule. Basically, you start with a score of 100, and every time you break the rule, you lose more points off of that score. It's designed to max out at 10 events, which means that if you break 10 events over the course of 100 miles or at the same rate, you're going to get a 0 in that category. For all of these, it's based off of basically per 100 miles. So that if you have 2 events in 50 miles, it's going to be scored the same as 4 events in 100 miles or 8 events in 200 miles. So we're always going to base it off of 100 miles driven. In this instance, A driver had 3 event counts, so they broke a rule 3 times. They drove 100 miles. Their score ends up being 70. That's the event count. The next is the violation percentage. This scoring method considers the severity of the exception rule events in relation to the total driving distance. This is done through utilizing the exception rule event percentage. So this is a different way to look at things. So I'll give you an example of why we do this. You may have an instance where someone is speeding, but they're on a highway, they're on cruise control, and they're speeding for 5 miles, but they only broke the rule once. Well, we want to consider that. We want to take that into consideration when we are calculating our scores. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, you have something like a harsh cornering exception, which we need to look at event count for that because they are a fraction of a second. We can't look at the total duration or the total distance of rules like that are just instantaneous. So we look at the event count. And that's why we look at both. It depends on the driver behavior. Now, in this violation percentage, and again, this one is looking at what percentage of their total distance are they breaking the rule. We have multipliers. And basically what this means is that the higher the percentage and the more that they are breaking the rule and the more severe that behavior is, the more points they're going to lose. We hit them harder as severity increases. That's where the multipliers come in. Based on the percentage of how much they are breaking the rule, we multiply that number and deduct more from those 100 points that they started with. So looking at the violation percentage, in this instance, we have the event distance is 10 miles. So they were breaking the rule for 10 miles, and their total driving distance is 400 miles. Their exception rule percentage is 2.5%. Based on that 2.5%, that falls right in here. There's 2.5% is in here on the left, and then you get the multiplier of 13 on the right. The multiplier for the percentile range this exception rule percentage falls in is 13. Based off of that, 2.5 times 13 from 100, they get a score of 67.5. Finally, we look at the hybrid. This scoring method is a combination of the event count method and the violation percentage method, and it ascribes a weight to each method. We're putting a higher weight on the violation percentage of 70%, and we're putting a slightly lower weight of 30% on the event count. In this way, we are looking at both how many times did they break the rule and what percentage of their driving distance they were breaking the rule, and we're taking those both into account. So here we have an instance, if we only look at an event count method score, that ends up being 60 if we just base it off of the number of times they broke the event. If we only look at the violation percentage, the severity of breaking the rule, they end up with a 76, which is a moderate discrepancy between the two. So we just want to reconcile those. We put 30% on the event count, we put 70% on the violation percentage score. When we combine them, we get the final hybrid method score, which in this instance is 71.2. Again, I don't want to bury you in decimal points any more than I already have, so for further reading, again, check out the white paper. Here's how we are calculating these scores for each rule that we're using. So for our ABC rules, we are only looking at the event count method. Again, those are the rules that are just a split-second infraction. For speeding, we're looking at the violation percentage method. So we're looking at what percentage of their driving distance was spent breaking the rule. For excessive speeding, we are looking at the event count method. And then we're using the hybrid method, which is a combination of event count and the violation percentage. We're using the hybrid method for seatbelt. All right, so looking at the report a little bit here, some of the graphics that you'll see in the report. So you have the average score of all vehicles and drivers in the fleet. You have a micro risk breakdown graph there. This is actually the graphic right here that's going to show on your dashboard. So you have the average score, and then you have the percentage of vehicles that fall within each risk classification, where you have low risk, mild risk, medium risk, or high risk. Again, this is your dashboard graphic. The report also highlights the top 10 performers on the report, so your top 10 vehicles or your top 10 drivers. You also have your bottom 10 vehicles or drivers displayed as well. Also included is the differential, which displays the difference between the average score of the top 10 and the average score of the bottom 10. Now, we give you this information because this is hopefully going to provide some insight as to how to apply coaching. Maybe the differential isn't that big between your top and your bottom performers, in which case you can maybe use the same coaching for everyone. If there is a big difference, then you may have to come up with some different methods. So you can find the report in the Geotab Marketplace. And at this point, I'm going to jump out of my presentation and into the Marketplace and the actual report and show you how to use it a little bit. So here we have a link to our Geotab Marketplace, and I'll actually put this link in the chat for GoToWebinar. So you have this available to you right now. Below here, we have a description of the report, some features and benefits. We have the Driver Safety Scorecard User Guide, which is going to walk you through how to set the report up. I'm actually going to demo this for you live. You also have the Driver Safety Scorecard Whitepaper, which I've alluded to throughout the webinar so far. So we are going to download the report. I'm going to click on Download and get this onto my computer and open it up. Here we have a risk breakdown screen. Again, this is the graphic right here that will be showing on the dashboard. We have our average score, and we have the percentage of vehicles within each risk category. Over on the left, you have the score range, low risk, mild, medium, high, and the number of vehicles. If I click on the top and bottom performers, I can see just that. So I have my top 10 listed at the top. I have my bottom 10 listed below that, and then I have my average of top 10, my average of bottom 10, and the differential between the two. Finally, here I have my report tab. So there is a lot going on here. First of all, we have our date range up here in the upper left corner. In this instance, we're looking at about a month of data. We have distance driven and fleet occurrences, which is the total number of exceptions. Just a note here, this is listed in kilometers. This report will actually calculate automatically, whether you have it set, your own database set to kilometers or miles. So nothing to be done there. It'll all calculate it automatically. Here is our average fleet score. Here we have the different rules that we are looking at. And we have the weights that are assigned to each rule. So in this instance, I have 10% assigned to acceleration, braking, and cornering, 20% to seatbelt, 20% to speeding, and 30% to excessive speeding. Now, if you want to adjust these, go right ahead. You can just click on the number here and change that. But keep in mind, it all has to add up to 100. If it doesn't, you're going to get that error message. So just make sure that you do that. Over here on the right, you have the classifications. So you have the baseline or the lowest possible score for low risk, mild, medium, and high. So for example, 60 is the cutoff for medium risk. Here I have my average fleet score of 66.8. So it falls in between medium and mild. But if I change this, say that I change this medium risk to 70, that means everything between 0 and 70 is now high risk, and the rest of the report is going to update. So if I just change this number, everything below 70 is now high risk, including our average fleet score. When I change it back, everything recalculates. So you can make whatever changes that you like to the weight percentage and to the risk classifications. When you're done making any adjustments, you want to make sure that you click back on the Risk Breakdown tab, and then you're going to save your file. You need to make sure that you are on this risk breakdown tab, because if you're not, it's going to change the dashboard graphic. If you're on this page when you save it and close it, you're going to get a weird looking dashboard. So make sure you're on this tab down here and save. Now we are going to jump into a database, and I will show you how to do some setup here. Now you want to make sure that you have your rules set up for this. So I'm going to go into my rules screen here, and I'm looking at harsh braking, hard acceleration, and harsh cornering. Again, I want to make sure that these are all turned on, and I want to make sure that I have the sensitivity set correctly based on my fleet. If I have a mixed fleet, this is the point at which I would make sure that I have my group set up and that I have my custom ABC rules set up for each group. Again, if you have questions on that, make sure that you are reaching out to whoever you contact for support. And in the instance of a mixed fleet, you may also want to consider running separate safety scorecards for each class of vehicle. Anyway, we have these three rules turned on. Below that, I have my speeding rule, which is turned on. This is currently set to 10 miles per hour over the speed limit, but of course I can adjust that to whatever I want. And then I have my seatbelt rule turned on, and that is that for the stock rules. Now you do need to create a custom rule in order to do this. And there's a couple different ways that you can do it. One way that I'll show you here is I'm just going to create the rule from scratch. So I'm going to click on this button that says Add, and I will name my rule, and I'll call it excessive speeding. Under conditions, I'm going to set this and say add speed over 85 miles per hour. If you want to use another speed, if you want to use different conditions, that's fine. You can do that. But this is what I'm going to use for right now. Of course, I have the option to create notifications if I want for when the rule is broken. I can add an email or set up a pop-up in the database or any of those things. I'm not going to do that right now, though. I'm just going to end it right here with my rule. And back on my rule screen, here is my excessive speeding rule that I created right here. So I have configured my report. I have set up my rules. Now I'm going to add the report into the database. So under Administration, Reports, and Report Views. Next, I'm going to click this button right up here that says Add Excel File, and I can bring the report into the database. I can drag and drop or click to browse. Here is my scorecard. This is the file that I just saved about 3 minutes ago, and add that in. From here, I'm on this tab that says Report View, and I want to change this to Yes. Down below, I can run report by device, or I can run report by driver. Now, you want to make sure that if you're going to run it by driver, that you're using some sort of driver identification tool. Maybe you're using ELD, maybe you're using NFC key readers, maybe you're manually assigning drivers to vehicles. But that's how you do it right here. But you need to make sure that you are using a driver ID if you set it to driver. If you're not, you're going to get a blank report. And in which case, you want to just leave that set to device, which is what most of you are going to do. Group by, I'm going to leave this set to none. Hide rows with 0 distance, I'm going to change that to on. Grouping options, I'm going to leave this set to individual vehicles or drivers. Now, I'm going to add in my rules, and it's very important that I do this in this exact order, and you will receive documentation on this. But I need to make sure that I go hard acceleration, harsh braking, harsh cornering, seatbelt, speeding, and excessive speeding. If you don't do them in this exact order, then you are going to get some funny data, and it's not going to be correct. Now from here, If I want to, I can add this report to my dashboard, or I can set this up as an email report. If it is going on the dashboard, pretty much just going to follow the same steps again. So I have my dashboard graphic options, turn that on. I choose whose dashboard I want to put it on, where if I want to put it on everyone's dashboard or only dashboards for users in a certain group. For now, I'm just going to put it on my own dashboard. Below that, I have the date range. We recommend running this as a weekly report. You certainly don't have to. If you'd rather do every 2 weeks or monthly, then that's absolutely fine. So I'm going to run this for last week. My refresh period is weekly. My next run, I'm going to say Monday morning at 5:30 a.m. And now this report is going to refresh every Monday morning at that time and show me the week before. Belonging to everything, because I want to see all vehicles in this report. Down below here, same as before, you have device or driver, group by, hide rows with 0 distance. I'm going to set that to on. Grouping options, individual vehicles or drivers, and then I need to make sure that I have all of these rules in this exact order. When I'm done, I'm going to scroll up to the top. I'm going to hit save, and it may take a moment to populate, but there it is. We'll give it a minute to load. Here we go. Here is our driver safety scorecard that has been added to our dashboard. Shows the average score right there in the middle. High risk, we have 0%. Medium risk, 14% of our vehicles fall in there. 57% of our drivers fall into mild risk and 29% into low risk. I can click right on this graphic to download it, and now this has all been repopulated with my data and my vehicles. Risk breakdown, my top and bottom performers, and then the report for all vehicles. So let me load you up with some resources here, and then we will answer some questions. The first resource I am going to give you, and this will be in the chat box in GoToWebinar, is a link to the presentation that I was using earlier, the slideshow that I had put together. I am also including a link to the Driver Safety Scorecard User Guide. Now, this is a document that I just walked you through, but you didn't know it. But this document will walk you through how to customize the report, how to set up your rule weights, how to set up your classifications, how to set up your rules, how to add all that into the database. So this is all documented for you. And again, you already have a link to the marketplace for the report, to download the report, and to review the white paper, which you so choose, which is a pretty interesting read. So on that note, that is going to conclude the presentation portion of today's webinar. David, any questions coming through that you think would be useful to address to everyone?
Sure. One we have here is how does this report work for multiple aggressive driving rule sets for different vehicle classes?
Sure. This is built off of the risk management report, which is so listed in here. So it should be one of these driver scorecards. I forget which one it was. But the risk management report only has support for 6 rules. So if you have a mixed fleet, you have light duty and medium duty and heavy duty, you actually do want to do a separate safety scorecard for each group of vehicles, for each fleet classification.
Okay, thank you. Another question we had is the old driver scorecard still available on the marketplace, or did this just completely take place of the old one?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest.
I was not entirely sure either. However, I think it did take the place of it, but if you do want the template for that old one, reach out to a support representative or account manager. They should be able to get you that original template if you want it.
Yeah, just a quick search here for scorecard. The only one that's coming up is the new one that we were going over today.
Okay, thank you, Ben.
So it looks like we have just a question. Can the colors of the graphics on the dashboard be brighter and more distinct? Sure, yeah. If you're handy with Excel and you want to come in here and prettify it however you like, feel free. Just make sure, again, you're on this risk breakdown tab when you save it. What are the major, this is a good question. What are the major upgrades from the past report? That's an outstanding question. So going by memory here, it's a little bit easier to enter in those different risk classifications. We've also taken a long, hard look at our scoring methods. I think that's probably the biggest difference between the older version of the report and the current version of the report. Just evaluating exactly how we are scoring these vehicles and making sure that it is the most effective way to do so. We also are adding in the top and bottom performers. That is an enhancement over the old version of the report. So it looks like that is about all that we are seeing here for questions. So that having been said, we are going to wrap up today's webinar. Again, you can find all of this on the Geotab Marketplace 100% free. You can visit our YouTube channel, which is actually, it's accessible right from the geotab.com main site. If I go to geotab.com, scroll all the way to the bottom, and here I have my YouTube button right here. So that having been said, thank you all so much for attending today. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. David, thank you very much for joining us and for helping us with questions. We appreciate it. And hope you all have a great day and a fantastic week. Thanks, everyone.